This lecture is about the Chesapeake region. You can see on the map on the left, it was settled in the 17th century. This is what is known as Virginia and Maryland today, and they became separate colonies in the 17th century. But the first colony was Jamestown, that you can see down at the bottom to the left, which was established in 1607. The colonies that were in yellow here, they were settled before 1650, and then some of the later settlements were the areas in green. So the Chesapeake region was initially founded by the Virginia Joint Stock Company, again in Jamestown in 1607, when they were really hoping to make a profit. It was all about making money in the New World. So initially they were looking for gold and silver, and then they hoped to trade with Indians. They looked for to cut down trees and lumber to sell as timber. They traded furs with the Native Americans and looked to fish the Chesapeake Bay. But over time, they really struggled, and none of these um, efforts were really panning out. So they turned to tobacco, which became the mainstay cash crop. So the settlers had struggled for years to survive. John Smith became the authoritarian leader that actually helped the colony remain organized and pull through a few winters in the early years of Jamestown. And then John Rolfe is the one that introduced tobacco to the area, and that really became the important cash crop that was then exported to England. So Chesapeake really meant freedom and opportunity for a lot of the people that were moving there. That's why they were going. But it also symbolized economic exploitation. So whereas it meant economic opportunity and freedom for the wealthy landowners and people that were able to acquire their own plot of land and make money off eventually selling tobacco, it meant that a lot of indentured servants were exploited. It also meant that the land that had been acquired was actually taken from Native Americans, so they were being exploited. Bacon's Rebellion showed some of the class tensions within the Jamestown colony, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And then after Bacon's Rebellion, we see that slavery replaces indentured servitude as the form of labor for the plantations, and that continues well into the next century and beyond. So indentured servants, they exchanged 5 to 7 years of their labor for a passage to America. So they basically worked very similar to slaves. And they were forced to continue and fulfill their service. A landowner would help pay their passage over to the New World, and then basically would have a claim on them. So, as we mentioned before, two-thirds of the English immigrants who were coming to the New World, or who were leaving England in the 17th century, were indentured servants. Similar to slaves, they could be bought and sold. So their contracts could be bought and sold, which meant that they would have to go work for someone else. They could be physically punished if they disobeyed or if they tried to run away. And the authorities, the law, they really enforced all these obligations that the indentured servants had. It was a form of unfree labor. Unlike slaves, however, indentured servants would eventually be free, and at the end of their service, they would often receive a payment. A plot of land is what they hoped for, but as we'll see, that actually became quite scarce to able to, with their ability to obtain land. So land acquisition itself was a form of economic exploitation, because although many people viewed land, of course, as a basis of freedom and opportunity, and that's what brought so many immigrants over to the New World, it required displacing thousands of Indians, taking land from them through military conquest, through warfare. So this is how the settlers were obtaining the land from Native Americans for the most part. Bacon's Rebellion is a famous rebellion in 1676 that really represents some of the inequality within uh, the society in Jamestown. So Governor William Barclay was a corrupt leader, and he gave a lot of the land to wealthy elites who already owned plenty of land, to the plantation owners. He would reward them, and at that time, only people that owned land could vote, so they would continue to give their political support to him. The former indentured servants were quite upset about this because that meant that they would either have to move out to the frontier or continue to work as tenant farmers, even after their indentured servitude ended, which meant that they would be indebted to the landholder and not have the economic opportunity and ability to become wealthy for themselves and not have the freedom and independence that they had hoped for. So they wanted Indian lands. These former indentured servants were really looking to acquire more lands from Native Americans. And so a series of Indian massacres turned into a full-on rebellion in Jamestown. And Bacon's army was mostly made up of poor landless farmers, mostly who had been indentured servants before. And they end up burning down Jamestown and take over shortly. And Governor Barclay flees, but soon after, Nathaniel Bacon dies, and the English Navy restores order. So it's a short-lived rebellion, but it had long-term consequences. The main consequence of this was that from then on out, the Chesapeake region shifted to using African slaves instead of indentured servants. So there's a shift from away from indentured servitude into African slavery, in order to work on the plantations, the tobacco plantations, because this meant that there would be fewer disgruntled former indentured servants who wanted to acquire land, which meant there would be more stability in society. So it also occurred, this transition towards slavery also occurred because the lifespan was actually increasing, and it became more profitable to actually own a slave because the initial purchase was expensive initially, but they would pay off over time because a slave was a slave for life. So as the price of slaves also decreased because of the supply coming from Africa through the Atlantic slave trade, it became more affordable as well for the landowners in the Chesapeake region to turn to slavery. And you can see how the demographics of the Virginia population changed. After Bacon's Rebellion, it started to become more based on slavery, and by 1700, 10% of the population was black. But by mid-century, by the mid-18th century, in 1750, half of the Chesapeake region was black. So these all are examples of how, even though the Chesapeake region was very much based on economic opportunity and the desire for land ownership, it came after exploiting Native Americans, indentured servants, and slaves.